Lunch and Learn. We're going to get started shortly, just giving a few of our brothers and sisters an opportunity to get on in here before we get started.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I trust you all had a good holiday. I was just saying to MP Adams before we came in, even though we had a day off, it still seems like it's been a long week. I'm sure many of you share my sentiments.
Well, I always say after a holiday that we should always have another day after.
A day to relax from the holiday.
Exactly.
Okay. It is 12:31. So we're going to get started now. And our admin for today, Sister Jermaine Jones, will continue to allow folks in the room as we get going, because we want to be able to utilize our entire hour for this important dialogue. So good afternoon to you once again, brothers and sisters. My name is Linda Bogermeinzer. I'm the Labor Relations Organizer for your union, the BPSU. In my capacity today, I am sitting in for the education chair, Sister Lauren Bell, who's feeling well today. So please join me in sending up some prayers for her that she recovers quickly. On behalf of the Education Committee, welcome to another Lunch and Learn series. Please feel free to eat your lunch and relax as we sit back today and listen to our speaker talk about the opportunities for a government mortgage program. We're pretty excited to have him with us today. And let me tell you a bit about him before I welcome him to take over. MP Jesse Adams was educated at Heron Bay Primary School and Work Academy before obtaining his Bachelor of Commerce degree at St. Mary's University. Upon graduating, he began his career as a management trainee at Butterfield Bank, where he worked for 12 years in both their Bermuda and Cayman Island offices, having left as an assistant vice president in their corporate banking department. Currently, he serves as the advisor to the Minister of Finance, manages real estate, and founded a small local IT business. With his strong passion for entrepreneurship, he serves as the chair of the board of the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation. He remains an active member in the community through Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, Inc., and recently was a math tutor for the local GED program for adults. For recreation, he enjoys basketball, cross-country running, bowling, and recently has taken up golf. Did I see you at the PGA on the course this weekend, sir?
I was.
Okay, excellent. Then you got some tips. It was a delightful event, and we're looking forward for you to bring your tips and information to our membership today. Please join me, brothers and sisters, in welcoming as our guest speaker this afternoon, MP Jesse Adams.
Thank you very much, Sister Linda. I really appreciate it. Just 1 second. All right. Can we see my opening slide? Yep. Oh, awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Certainly not used to being in a space where I do Zoom meetings. Sometimes I prefer to just see people face to face, but nonetheless, also when Sister Lauren had asked me to do this lunch and learn, I was expecting maybe 15, 20 people, certainly not 76, but it's good. It's a good turnout. I'm excited about it. I'm excited that you all are interested to learn more about the government's mortgage guarantee program. And so we'll kick off. I think, as Sister Linda had said, my name is Josh A. Adams. And today I just want to walk you through the government's mortgage guarantee program that we have with Bermuda Commercial Bank. I have a few slides to go over with you, but of course, I most importantly want to hear from you and particularly answer as many questions as I can. I do have a simple request, and that's for us to not sort of turn this into a complaining session about the banks. We can be here all day discussing about how they increase fees and increase interest rates and how much record profits they're making, and yet they're still letting many of the workforce go. I just want you all to know that when it comes to that particular side of it, you are preaching to the converted. And so we can go down that rabbit hole another day, but I just wanted to make this lunch and learn very specific to the program that we have with Bermuda Commercial Bank. And simultaneously, I think if we can keep the questions sort of to the end, I think that would be beneficial as well, because it would allow me to get through the few slides that I have. It's not many, the few slides that I have, and ultimately will allow us, be able to better assist yourselves. So with that, you figure out how to here we go. All right. So with that, just a quick overview of what I had planned for this session to give us a bit of background as to how we got here. Then speak specifically on Bermuda Commercial Bank itself, then get into some program details, so some real details, and we can get into the nitty-gritty of our mortgage guarantee program. Then I think it's interesting and important, actually, for me to at least touch base in some regards to some recent amendments that the government did in relation to stamp duty and how it all correlates. And then finish with some FAQs that people typically have asked us, and then ultimately get to a space where I can be in a position to answer any of your questions. I will be mindful that many of you, and I'm not asking you to, but many of you have your videos off. So I hope that what I'm saying, you can follow along, and I'll try to be as helpful and as factual and informational as I possibly can. But I think more the point is, if I was in a room, it's easier to tell facial expressions, whether people are following or if they're a bit lost, and I can sort of reiterate. But nonetheless, we'll plow along. So, give you a bit of background in terms of how and why we got to this mortgage guarantee program. The first is, we recognize that we are in a rising interest rate environment. There's no secret to any of us that we're in a rising interest rate environment. My first two bullet points under that comment speaks to how much those two specific banks just over the last 3 years have increased their interest rates. Increased their interest rates. And so we recognize that this has a tremendous impact on particularly people with their disposable income. And then particularly if we get into landlords who then feel as though my mortgage is going up, and so therefore I have to now charge or increase my rent. But I think, I think the first thing to recognize is that we started this program back in October of last year. We looked at it as a 3-phase approach. So the first phase, we opened it up to first-time home buyers that were under the age of 40. We're now on to the second phase, and hence us having this conversation this afternoon. And the second phase, we no longer put an age restriction on it. So now any first-time home buyer can participate in the program. But also it was important for this government to also now open it up so that our public officers are eligible to transfer their mortgage and be a part of this program as well. And so in essence, and in its simplest form, if you are a public officer and you are unhappy with your mortgage rate, you now are eligible to transfer that mortgage over and be a part of the program and receive a rate of 5%. I think that's important to first, establish what is your current interest rate. And as I said, particularly if you are with Butterfield or Clarion, who over the last 3 years have noticeably increased their interest rates in comparison to the other 2 banks. To give a bit of context as to how long this idea has been happening, we being the government, first mentioned the idea in our 2019-20 budget statement, where we said the government will, in conjunction with private sector banks, pilot a mortgage guarantee program in return for a reduction in interest rates charged to Bermudians and for their mortgages. And I think it's also key. And this is why I put it in my third point, is that the program was offered to all banks. And the reason I say that is because many people have taken or the idea that the government specifically went to Bermuda Commercial Bank and asked them to participate. And that is not the case. The government went to all 4 banks, and only Bermuda Commercial Bank agreed to proceed with this initiative. And that's why the the arrangement is only with Bermuda Commercial Bank, because at the time they were the only ones that agreed to participate. To give a bit of context in terms of Bermuda Commercial Bank, I think it's important that we first establish that they've been around for 54 years in various capacities and various forms, but they've been around, they're well established. Then we're talking about the fact that they're BMA regulated and fully licensed. One of the strengths of Bermuda, if you will, as a financial center, many of you know, is because of the high quality of our regulator. And I emphasize this because any institution that we have on island that is regulated by the BMA, there's a level of confidence that we have that they are of sound and good quality. Again, sort of repeating what I said earlier, they were the only bank that was prepared to participate, which is a conversation in of itself. And then I put these last 2 points here where we talk about total capital ratio and liquidity coverage ratio. These are very banking terms, and I don't want to sort of get down into the technical details, but the point really is that both of those ratios are above the regulatory requirements, or significantly above the regulatory requirements, meaning that it is sufficient capital and sufficient liquidity to withstand any sort of shocks, any sort of negative downturn. So the balance sheet is of good quality, whereas if something negative were to happen, there's still enough of a buffer, if you will, to still be able to function. So that is my long roundabout way of saying that they're well established, well regulated, well capitalized. It's a solid and sound bank. So let's get into the fun of it all. And we can get into the details. And so the first thing that I want to sort of drive home is that banks, or sorry, not even banks, businesses and investors and the like all consider risk versus return or risk versus reward. And banks are no different. And so with regards to interest rates, the lower the risk, the lower the interest rate, and vice versa. The higher the risk, the higher the interest rates. And I'm sort of making this in general terms. And so I get it, because sometimes this can actually upset people, because what ends up happening is, let's assume someone has a lot of money and they have a lot of money, and so therefore they tend to be a lower risk to banks, and so therefore the banks then in certain circumstances offer them a lower interest rate. And it becomes frustrating because someone with less money who's sacrificing and doing the best they could tends to, from the bank's perspective, be a higher risk and therefore apply a higher interest rate. And so it becomes frustrating, because those who have all the money seem to be charged the lower interest rates, while those who are struggling are applied the higher interest rate. Also, I think it's also key to emphasize some jurisdictional reasons as well. So I'll give you an example. Bermuda tends to have what we call a non-performing loan to total loan ratio. Trying not to get technical here, but basically, let's call it default. So our default rate is roughly just about 5.5% to 6%. That is quite high, believe it or not. I know it sounds low, but it's actually quite high, because banks typically want to be in the 3 to 4 range. So for Bermuda to have a default rate that is above 5 and at times have been 6 is really high for a bank. Now, in comparison, and to give some sort of jurisdictional comparison, the Cayman Islands, their default rate is roughly about 2%. And I say all of this to say that, and I don't want to come across like I'm defending banks, but I just wanted to give an understanding as to some of the reasons that go into banks charging the rates that they do. Is that because Bermuda's, it's not technically a default rate, but I'm going to call it a default rate, because Bermuda's default rate is in the 5 to 6 range versus a Cayman Islands that's in the 2 to 3 range. Lending to Bermuda can tend to be far riskier than lending to the average person in the Cayman Islands. And so these are some of the things that are being considered when a bank applies or offers certain rates that they do. I say all of that to say that what the government then proceeded to do, because the overall aim is to provide relief for many of our Bermudians and to sort of offset or curtail the rising interest rates that banks are applying, is to offer a sovereign guarantee, a government guarantee. Now, ultimately, what that does is that provides or gives the loan a lower risk level. And so the bank has agreed that because the loans are of lower risk, they will offer a lower interest rate. And so that's a big win for us to be able to say to the public and provide an opportunity for them to receive a lower interest rate. But that wasn't enough. Just a lower interest rate was not enough. And so one of the key features of this program also is that the down payment requirement is cut in half as well. And so a very simple example would be that if an individual were to try to apply for a $600,000 mortgage, if you will, typically, and what is standard by all 4 banks, is for the borrower to come up with 20%, and the bank will lend you the remaining 80%. So if you were applying for a $600,000 mortgage, the bank will say that you have to come up with $120,000, and they will lend you the remaining $480,000. Well, what we did was we arranged with BCB to allow them to cut that requirement in half. So instead of 20%, which most of the other banks ask for, if you are a part of this program, your down payment requirement is now cut in half. So instead of 120, that person looking for a $600,000 mortgage now has to come up with $60,000. It's very key, sort of moving into my next point. I think it's very key that we emphasize that the government is not involved in or has any influence in the bank's decisions. That is, their loans, we are simply guaranteeing the loan based on their level of criteria. And so many instances, I shouldn't say many instances there, but there have been instances where, you know, and I think the government sort of just wants to reiterate that we are not involved in any decisions. We don't control who they decide to lend to, how they decide to enforce anything like that. It is, we are simply providing a guarantee. It's ultimately intended for mortgages of $1 million or less. Now, I use the word intended because there are instances, and we have provided flexibility for mortgages that go above $1 million, but traditionally the scope of the intent of this program is to cover mortgages that are $1 million or less. And I'll skip to my last point before I get into the 50 million capacity, but it's meant for the purchase of a property and for minor renovations. And so the reason I say this, it's not meant for someone who has a land, some land, and they want to do major construction work. That's just not the purpose of this particular program. The program is for individuals who say, I'm interested, or I see particular property on the market. I'd like to purchase that property, and then I'd like some additional funds to make some minor renovations, i.e., I want to renovate the bathroom, or I want to renovate the kitchen or something like that. Then that's part of the program. But ultimately, and I think this is the message, or a key message that I want to drive home, is that this has a capacity. So this is not unlimited, which is part of the reason why I wanted to drive home and speak to as many public officers as I can, is because there will come a time when we reach our capacity and this will no longer be available. And so it is the Minister of Finance, the Premier's focus and emphasis to try to get our public officers in as early as possible before that capacity runs out. So I hope you all can see this. This is an example of some savings. Again, very generic. It's very difficult, in my years of lending at the bank, I can tell you that every borrower, every loan, every situation is different. But I just wanted to sort of give a simple example of the types of savings that we're talking about. And I'm speaking to yourselves, particularly if you are an individual, if you are a public officer that already has an existing mortgage, the potential savings that you may or you will receive if you were to transfer your mortgage over and be a part of the program. So I said, assuming that you have $600,000 left, 600,000 clearly is my magic number, apparently. But assuming you have $600,000 left on your mortgage and you have about 15 years left on your mortgage, if you were to keep it the same, and I'll use the 9% column as an example, but if you were to keep it the same, then you obviously would not incur any stamp duty, you wouldn't incur any legal fees, you wouldn't incur any bank fees, and your monthly payments will be roughly about $6,000. And you can use the 7% in a similar fashion. And so what happens is persons then look at, well, if I was to transfer my mortgage over, I will incur some legal fees, yes, and they will be roughly $6,000-ish. Again, I'm ballparking it here. And similar to the bank fees, because the bank will obviously apply to to set up the loan as well. And I think actually in talking with Bermuda Commercial Bank, they're actually looking to reduce that amount as well. But basically, if you were to transfer your mortgage over, obviously your principal balance would increase because you're transferring it over. And so you're incurring legal fees, you're incurring bank fees. But you will see that because of the lower interest rates, your monthly repayments go down significantly as well. And so your total savings, and you'll see the 2 points that I'm making, the total savings in the course of those 15 years in this simple example would be that you would save approximately $236,000 if you are currently going from a 9% environment into the program where you will receive 5%, or 111,000 if you were to be in a 7% environment going into the 5%. One of the key things that I wanted to drive home is notice that, and I'll get into it in further detail. I think it's the next slide. Yeah, it is the next slide. But you'll notice that you will not incur any stamp duty as well. That was not the case up until earlier this year. What the government has done was we recognize that part of assisting Bermudians in lowering interest rates is by creating competition. And so one of the things that the government has decided to do was eliminate stamp duty to allow it to be easier for individuals to shop around their mortgage, if you will, and create competition amongst the banks. And so we have eliminated stamp duty for any mortgage that is $1 million or less to transfer that over. And so it's helping to make it, to incentivize yourselves, again, to shop around that mortgage and really get the best rate for yourself and know that you won't incur any stamp duty if you were to transfer your mortgages over. So again, getting into the stamp duty amendments, as I said, I think we did it in March, April-ish of this year, but previously it was 750,000. We've now raised it to $1 million. We've then introduced marginal rates. So stamp duty, what do I mean by this? Again, I apologize. Sometimes I do this all day, every day. And so let me backtrack, if you will. When I say raise the exemption limit from 750 to $1 million, what that means is if Josh A. Adams were a first-time homeowner or home buyer, and I wanted to purchase a property that was 750,000, then I would not be charged any stamp duty. But what happens is that anything above 750, I would be responsible to pay the stamp duty on the full amount. Well, first of all, we said 750 is too low. Let's increase that amount. So now any purchase that is $1 million or less is exempt of any stamp duty. And when we say the introduction of marginal rates, that basically says is that $1 million applies across the board. And so let's use an example. If I were to purchase a property that was $1 million, then I would be totally exempt from stamp duty. But traditionally, prior to that amendment, if my purchase was $1.2 million, I would have to pay the stamp duty on the full $1.2 million. So here it is. One person is buying a property worth $1 million and they are stamp duty free, and $200,000 more, and I've got to pay stamp duty on the full 1.2. So what the government did was we then said,
this just seems like a good move.
hello? Hello? Oh. So what the government said was that wasn't right. And so the marginal rates is a long about way of saying that now we've said no matter what the purchase price is, the first $1 million will be exempt from stamp duty. So that person that is purchasing a property at $1.2 million, instead of them paying stamp duty on $1.2 million, they now only are paying stamp duty on $200,000 because the first $1 million is exempt. So that was a key change. So not only have we raised the limit to $1 million, but we've now introduced marginal rates so that that $1 million is exempt no matter what the purchase price is. And then we're talking about, as I said, the mortgage refinancing, so the transferring of the mortgages. So if your mortgage is $1 million or less, you can transfer it to any other bank and not incur any stamp duty. So let's get into some FAQs. Let me just double check my time here. So let's get into some FAQs. So how long does the application process take? I can tell you, being completely honest, as a person who did this for many years, it really depends. Depends on the situation, depends on the borrower, depends on the type of security, depends on, you know, how much they made, the rental income, things of that nature. Very difficult to really pinpoint it. But what BCB typically aims to do is for it to take about 3 weeks. So that is their aim. Now, that is BCB, again, that is on them, but they have articulated that their aim is to have that process take about 3 weeks from the time that a person expresses interest. Now, in saying that, obviously it depends on whether or not they receive the documentation on time, whether the documentation fully answers the questions, if you will. So it all depends, but that's my long about way of saying that the overall intent is for the process to take about 3 weeks. Is the 5% rate fixed? It's a big question that people always ask, and the answer is no. And that tends to be sort of a concern for people, and I get it, because the fear is that what I will call a bait and switch. So the fear is that it's 5% now, you transfer your mortgage in, and then all of a sudden BCB says, you know, it's has a significant increase. That is not the case. That is not the case. This is not a bait and switch sort of scenario. It is not anything like that. Effectively, the banks offer a floating rate because they obviously have to operate in an interest rate environment as well. But what they do say is they are not going to increase the rate any more than, I shouldn't say they say, what I will say is it is very much reasonable to expect that they would not increase the rates any higher than where your banks are currently being held. So for example, we know that Fed rates go up, and typically the banks then increase their rates in accordance with the Fed rates. The banks, what BCB is saying is that if we ever did increase the rate, it would only be in a similar fashion to our competitors. So let's assume that you were 9%, let's assume you were 7%, and wherever you are, they say we're going up 0.5%. Then the BCB says we would go up by a similar 0.5% if we were to go up at all. And I want to sort of emphasize that even in this increasing interest rate environment that exists today, the banks that have increased their rates thus far significantly, as I mentioned earlier, are Butterfield and Clarion. For the most part, HSBC, even in this interest rate environment, HSBC and BCB have still maintained their rates. So I say all of this to say it's not fixed, it's not guaranteed, but it's also not a bait and switch. It's not we're trying to get you in the door so that we can then do an unreasonable interest hike. So what is the definition of a first-time home buyer? Sounds simple, but one of the things that I just wanted to sort of emphasize, because this is a unique situation, if, for example, now first-time home buyers, obviously, if you don't own a home, and you're looking to purchase a home, then you would obviously be considered a first-time home buyer. Also, if you had a home and for some reason you lost the home or you sold it, so you no longer have a home, you will then still be considered a first-time home buyer if you were to purchase look to be a part of the program. And thirdly, if your mother or your parent or your grandparent then willed you a property, if you are a holder of 25% or less of that property, and you wanted to get a property of your own, you would still be considered a first-time homeowner as well. So, for example, if your parent willed you a property and there was at least 3 other people also on the property, then if you decided to get something on your own, despite you having a stake in an existing property, you will still be considered a first-time home buyer. And I just wanted to sort of emphasize that. So even if you had a property and you sold it and you were looking to purchase again, you would still be considered a first-time home buyer. And if you were willed a property and your stake is 25% or less, you will still be considered a first-time home buyer as well. Are there any additional fees that will be applied? So I spoke to that. We get into the legal fees and then what the banks call the loan origination fees. But again, the point that I'm trying to drive home is that even with those fees, the reduced interest rates can have a significant potential of reducing your monthly repayments. And over time, those reduced monthly repayments add up and can sort of far supersede whatever additional fees that you would incur in the beginning. So who do I contact for more information? Obviously, Bermuda Commercial Bank. I would certainly always encourage you to reach out to Bermuda Commercial Bank. They can actually work out, they have the formula and the resources to listen to your situation and be able to demonstrate to you how much you will save in terms of your monthly repayments, but also how much you will save over the course of time, depending on how long you have on your mortgages, left on your mortgages. And then if we are on phase 2, what will phase 3 look like? So phase 2, as I said, we've opened it up to first-time home buyers of any age, and also allowing public offices to be able to transfer their mortgages into the program as well. Phase 3 then opens up to the wider public. So we've said that once we move into phase 3, then anyone that is interested, that has an existing mortgage, is able to transfer their mortgage over, recognizing again and sort of re-emphasizing the fact that we have a capacity. We have a $50 million limit. And so, it's, how do I put it? Not necessarily first come, first serve, but just be mindful that there is a limit. I do want to say, and I'll finish with this, that it is what I would consider a pilot program, or what the government considers to be a pilot program, because, and I can tell you that we are actively involved in an initiative with all 4 banks, in an initiative that will help to reduce mortgage rates throughout all banks, so that it applies to all loans, actively participating in that. But this was sort of a first step, or a pilot program, if you will, whilst we focus on and try to achieve the overall objective, which is to reduce mortgage rates for everyone. And so with that, Sister Linda, I am more than ready and willing to answer any questions.
Thank you for that.
And
Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I do apologize sort of if I got in the weeds a bit. I hope that persons were able to follow. But yeah, so just open to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. Informative, certainly. And now, brothers and sisters, the floor is open to questions. If you could raise your hand, and then we will take any questions. Sister Jermaine, Sister Joseph.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Just Shay, thank you very much. Very informative. My question is, if someone is gifted a piece of land,
Mhm.
why would they not be considered for the program if they have to build something? Because they may only be building a small cottage, it may only be 400,000, 500,000, and still low risk. Was that ever considered?
Yes. So awesome question. The answer is that is not. Let me back up. That is not a government decision. The government did not decide this. This was more of a bank decision. And the reality is there's two realities to it. The first is that BCB is relatively new to the lending space. So the other banks have been lending in Bermuda for, forever. But BCB is relatively new, and so they're growing their lending portfolio, if you will. And so this is sort of one of the initiatives that will help them grow their books. And secondly, is that, and I get it, but the reality is from the bank's perspective, is that anything to do with major constructions immediately increase the risk. And because, we all know what construction costs can be like, and construction overruns, and, plans don't get completed and things of that nature. And it's not to say that it's the case for everyone, but to answer your question, from the bank's perspective, in terms of how they can get comfortable with this, particularly in what I would say is a relatively early stage of the portfolio, it's simply designed to be a purchase with minor renovations. Because they're growing their experience level, if you will, in lending, but also recognizing that things that require major construction, major development immediately, and it's the case for all four banks, but a purchase and a minor renovations is far less riskier than major construction. And so those are the two reasons why the bank themselves felt comfortable in not, or sort of required for them not to be able to allow major construction at this time.
Okay, thank
So
you.
So
I have another question, but I hope
so more my point is, it has been discussed, it has been considered.
Okay.
It's not so much of a government initiative, rather than in negotiation with the bank. That's sort of where they felt comfortable with at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Brother Smith, Ronald Smith.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Sister Linda. Brother Adams, good question for you.
Sure.
Well, and you may have begun to answer it with your previous response to the last question, and it may be something we have to follow up with BCB themselves.
Mhm.
When you mentioned the minor renovation, did they have a structure by which that is defined, or is this something that's probably case by case, do you think?
Both, actually. So what they've defined it as is $50,000. So $50,000. So, round numbers, right? So a person comes in, says, I want to borrow 600,000, but I want, additional 50 to do some minor renovations around the house, whether it be a lawn, or kitchen, bathroom, whatever the case may be. That's it. That being said, that is the general rule. And I don't want to speak for BCB, but there can be slight exceptions depending on the circumstances. But I would just, to sort of answer your question and give you a bit of context as to where I'm going, I would say about $50,000 is really sort of the benchmark as to the type of minor renovations they're referring to.
All right, thank you very much.
And I'll give you an example. that I know off the top of my head. There was an individual who applied and wanted purchase a property, but the property needed significant, and this is also going to Ms. Joseph's question as well. The property needed significant renovations to the roof, and so much, so much so that it almost required, to get rid of the existing roof and rebuild a new one. And that sort of got out of the scope of the program. Again, it's really just meant for, I like the property, but, maybe I want some new windows, or I want a new bathroom, kitchen, or just some new appliances, whatever the case may be. It's not intended to be full-on major construction.
Of course, I appreciate that.
Not a problem. So yeah, 50,000 is the benchmark. Again, slight exceptions, and those will have to be conversations that you have with the bank, but that would be sort of the barometer.
Thank you. Is it brother or sister Tolbert?
Sister,
Sister.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sister Tolbert.
good afternoon. My question is regards to the mortgage payments.
Yes.
Is that a process whereby the payments are deducted from our salaries? And if so, if you have people that work outside of the government that are part of the existing mortgages, how does that work? So husband and wife, one works for government and one doesn't.
So yeah, so this is traditionally, doesn't come out of the salary payments. This is just you having the obligation. Again, husband and wife works perfectly fine. The space is if anyone was a public officer and they went into a mortgage with someone else, then the collective responsibility is to honor that agreement. So it would still apply. It doesn't come directly out of your salary, more of a responsibility of the borrowers to make the payment.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you, Sister Tolbert. Is this a brother or sister Ingerman?
Sister Ingerman.
Oh, sister. So Barbara?
Yes.
Hey, how you doing, sis? Go ahead
Okay.
with your question.
Good afternoon. A very informative session. Just a
you.
question. A family member has passed, and there are 5 people who stand to inherit the property. If you wanted to buy out the other persons and your percentage is 31% of the shares in the property,
Mhm.
would this program still apply?
So you have 31%, yes. So, and you wanted to transfer into the program?
No, to be a first time earner, basically.
Okay, so with 2 separate things. To be a first time home buyer, no. And that's not sort of being difficult. It's sort of in legislation that you can only be a first time home buyer if it's 25% or less. What I'm saying, but I'm also saying that if one of the owners, and if you as a 31% have the shares, you would still be eligible to qualify to transfer it over from where it is, and take on and be a part of the program.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So one of the again.
There are a couple of questions.
Oh,
in the
sorry.
chat.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the questions in the chat is the 10% deposit of the purchase price cash only? I don't know. Maybe the person could clarify that. I don't know how else would it be. I don't know. Bitcoin. I don't know.
What I will say, I'm smiling to myself. What I will say is yes, yes is my answer. But I will say that in very short order, there are going to be initiatives that will be rolled out to make it for additional ways to make that down payment even easier for individuals. That's pretty much as I can say without getting out of school. I hope you all forgive me, but something is in the works. It will be announced in relatively short order to say that there are ways and means to make that down payment requirement even easier for individuals.
Thank you. Another question is, can you make this presentation available via copy to send out to persons that attended this session?
Of course, of course, of course.
Excellent.
Yeah,
If you could send it on to Sister Lauren, and then we'll make sure that it's distributed to our membership.
sure. This is, the entire intent is for us to really drive home that message. There's an opportunity here. Again, every loan is different, every borrower is different, every situation is different. I'm mindful of that. But there is an opportunity where all of us as public officers can look to reduce our mortgage rates and provide us with even more disposable income. And so I would strongly encourage you to, at the very least, reach out to Bermuda Commercial Bank, ask them, provide them with your details. They can tell you exactly how much you are due to save from your current situation if you were to be a part of the program. And I think, we want to be able to continue that message so that many of our public officers can take advantage and begin to see some of the relief that you so richly deserve. Do you like that one, Sister Linda?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The next question is from, is it Biza? If you could turn on your microphone.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to
Sister?
apologize.
Sister?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sister.
Yes, it's sister.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I apologize again for not joining from the beginning. My lunch hour started at 1, unfortunately. Would you be possibly, I think there are a few minutes left, to summarize? I was there from 1 p.m. onward. Anything that I didn't get, please. And I'll be grateful for the slides also.
Sure.
Sister, brother Adams, unfortunately, because we're getting quite near to our time and we have a number of other questions, unless his summary is going to be very, very brief, I would say that you may have to wait for the presentation. But I certainly would open the floor to Brother Adams.
All right, here's my 10-second elevator pitch. My 10-second elevator pitch is the government recognizes that interest rates were rising. And the truth is, if you look at the markets now, the trend still continues to go upwards. One of the ways that the government has decided to curb that and sort of bring those interest rates down is by offering the bank a guarantee. By offering the bank a guarantee, that reduces the risk to the bank, and the bank has agreed to offer a lower interest rates to anyone that wants to participate. We are now on phase 2 of the program, which allows any public officer the ability to transfer the mortgage over from where it is over into the program to take advantage of that reduced interest rate.
So this is basically for those that are already have a mortgage going, or anybody that's starting?
So already have a mortgage, or if you are a first-time home buyer. So if you do not have a mortgage in your name and you are interested in purchasing a house, this applies to you as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're on mute, Sister Linda.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. Actually, this leads into our next question in the chat. Do employees of Quengos qualify as public officers when it comes to this?
These are good questions. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. My initial answer is no, but I'm not certain. And so I'll look into that and I will pass it on to Sister Lauren so she can disseminate.
Sure, excellent. Another question is, if you transfer a mortgage, is the down payment needed?
No. So if you are transferring your mortgage, the down payment is not needed. In fact, if I'm really being honest, and this is my banker's hat on, the bank would much prefer to have refinances than new loans. So no, that is the short answer. You will not have to make a down payment requirement. I mean, you would effectively need to qualify again. And that sort of, that's a great question. I enjoy that question because it leads me to, you will have to requalify again. And so what happens is, and this is part of the frustration, I want to dispel some of this, is that let's just assume husband and wife got a mortgage 20 years ago and they qualify for that mortgage and they've been honoring that mortgage for the last 5-7 years, let's just hypothetically say. But the reality is the situation that they're currently in isn't quite what it was 5-7 years ago. That could be an instance where the banks, so it's not just an automatic, I'm going to transfer it over. You would basically still need to qualify, but that's one of the reasons. So no, you won't have to make a down payment, but you will have to requalify. I hope that provides some clarity.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess this is a little bit more clarity about the funds. It says if a person has funds at a credit union, can a note be presented?
Those are bank questions for specifically BCB to answer, and by all means, you're open to ask them whenever you give them a call. In my banking days, that would be fine. So I'm not going to speak for BCB. I'm just going to say historically in my days of lending, if you were to have a fund that is relatively liquid, that can go towards your down payment as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I see you, Mr. President and Brother Smith. Just one last question out of the chat. And when will phase 3 start?
When will phase 3 start? I'm smiling because that is the universal question, particularly if you are not a public officer. Many people often wonder, when is phase 3 going to start? There is no timetable for it. What I will say is that it would be reasonable for us to assume that an announcement on phase 3 will be articulated in the upcoming budget statement.
Okay. Thank you.
So I mean, there is no timetable set. There is no timetable set at the moment, but I believe it would be reasonable to assume that we would have a update and an announcement will be made during the budget statement.
Okay, Mr. President.
Yes, good afternoon, President Adams. Thanks for your time today.
Not a problem.
I know it was rescheduled, and I'm happy to hear some of the questions and answers that's taken place. But the General Secretary and myself did engage in some conversation with BCB.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? They wanted to actually join you today. And I said, I think you better give the opportunity for the MP to speak to our members first.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds to me that the bank needs to be on this as well, because questions that you can't answer, but possibly they can answer. So what I can do, I mean, I don't know your time, but what I can do is just speak with the chairperson of this education committee to see if that will be welcomed by, for the members, because they have some direct questions that they can answer.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to join as well. I think, you know, there's two spaces to it. Obviously, when we get into the technical details of it from the banking perspective, again, as I mentioned, even in the slides, all banking decisions are made by the bank. We have no influence, we have no say on how they choose to lend or operate or even enforce. And I think enforce is a key piece to this as well. We look at it from, I'm coming at it from, it's going to sound cheesy, but I'm looking at it, I'm coming from a political angle in this perspective of this was an initiative driven by the government, recognizing that we're in a rising interest rate environment and trying to do something to help reduce the cost of borrowing in Bermuda. And this is our pilot program. And I wanted to reemphasize that even as a pilot program, to reassure that there's a wider scope program in the works as well. But absolutely, you know, and then, so I do have the experience in lending, so you know, I can articulate from that perspective, but by all means, certainly would invite yourselves to have a conversation with BCB to get more into the technical details in terms of the reasonings of their decisions, because it is their decisions.
Excellent. So I would see to that if we can get that sorted out.
Awesome.
I don't know if the members would like to get this sorted or answered before Christmas or after Christmas. I know Christmas is around the corner. So we can just let us know quickly in the chat, a thumbs up just before Christmas, a thumbs down after Christmas. Thanks.
Sure. I don't know if you all saw, but I'm happy to also, there's a video that's like a 3-4 minute video on our mortgage guarantee program, really speaks to some of the details that I covered earlier. So they can accompany the slides, if you will. So slides and the video, and also give some testimonies as to some of the impacts of people's lives that it's actually having. You know, there are people who are actually seeing savings as a result of this program, and that's the overall intent.
Thank you for that. Brother Smith, I saw you had your hand up. Was your question answered?
Yes, ma'am. My question was answered. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Well, brothers and sisters, we have come to the end of our Lunch and Learn session for today. MP Adams, that was a very, very informative presentation, and I think it was good for us to hear it from you ourselves, because sometimes, you know, when these things come out, by the time you get the different translations, you know, we're not sure what the program actually is. So it was good to hear from you. Let me ask this question. If a person was a public officer for, say, 25 years, they just retired this year, would they still be able to take advantage of the program?
I will say this. I will say that is out of the scope, but not out of reason for a discussion to be had.
Okay, thank you.
So, and I just wanted to drive home. The reality is there is a reason why we have allocated and asked for public officers to be first eligible. You know, there's a reason for that. We believe in the work that you do, and it's a reason why, before we open it up to the wider public, why we put our public officers first. And I say all of this to say that if someone has put in many years of work and have recently retired, their value and contribution is no less. And so a conversation is certainly warranted and can be had.
Thank you. I was hoping that would be your answer, because, you know, we have public officers that have been committed to public service for a considerable amount of years, who have asked the questions. Look, I just left last year. I would have loved to have been able to take advantage of this program. So thank you for that. Certainly for that consideration also. And also thank you for giving up your time to come into the labor environment and speak to our members about an opportunity. We have been very vocal about being able to create more purchasing power for our membership, but also to give our membership the opportunity to be land owners and house owners in their own country. And I think that's crucial. And so we're glad that such an initiative is on the table. And we hope now that many more have heard it for themselves, that they may at least consider the options that are available to them. So thank you very, very much.
Awesome.
for
And if I
that.
just I just wanted to, I appreciate you. Thank you. My last thing was, it doesn't hurt just to give BCB a call and say, here's my certain situation. If I were to be a part of this program, what level of savings would I receive? They have the tools, they have the resources to be able to tell you that in relatively quick order.
Thank you. And Mr. President, I can report, just looking at the chat, it seems the vast majority have said sooner or later, mostly thumbs up, which is before Christmas, if I remember your criteria. And so they are interested in getting that information. And according to the chat, Brother Adams, people were very, very pleased with the information you presented. And
Thank you.
if they have some additional questions, how should they reach out to you, or should they reach out to
Yeah.
us?
Well, I'm always open. So I can give you my email address. My email address is JAAdams, so there's 2 A's, JAAdams@govt.bm. So by all means,
Adams@gov.bm.
.bm.
All right, I put it in
So
the chat.
yeah, awesome. So I'm always available to answer any questions, you know, whether it be mortgage guarantee or anything else. I'm always open. So yeah.
Okay, excellent. And thank you once again. And thank you, brothers and sisters. We remind you that this is our continuous series, and look out for information with the next Lunch and Learn that should be coming up next month, I believe. And also a reminder that this week is Anti-Bullying Week. We encourage you to come around to the union, get your stickers, your anti-bullying stickers and your posters, or reach out to me and get your brochures. The theme for this year is make some noise around bullying and harassment. If you are experiencing it, make some noise. And if you see it happening, make some noise. Thank you for that. Trust that you will have a fantastic rest of the week, and we will see you again on our Lunch and Learn series. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great session.